What if a $10 abandoned ranch held a secret that could change a soldier's life forever? Under the amber skies of Durango, Colorado, battle-worn soldier Caleb Rohr thought he was buying nothing more than an abandoned ranch for $10. A quiet place to disappear. But when he opened the creaking door, the air wasn't empty. On the back porch, a young bobcat crouched in the fading light. Its golden eyes locked on his, one paw resting on a torn scrap of wool. It didn't run. It didn't snarl. It looked at him like it had been waiting for him and for a truth that would change both their lives forever. But what was this mysterious bobcat guarding, and why was it left behind? Stay with us to uncover the hidden truth. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The wind in late autumn carried the scent of dry grass and cold stone across the valley of Durango, Colorado. The mountains stood in quiet watch, their peaks brushed with the first snow of the season. Caleb Rohr drove alone down the cracked county road, his old Ford truck rattling over potholes. At 38, his face bore the deep lines of someone who had seen too many winters in foreign deserts. Broad-shouldered, but lean, his left knee still stiff from a roadside blast years ago. He carried himself with the kind of stillness soldiers keep long after the war is over. The townsfolk he passed didn't know him. He had left Durango 8 years earlier with a duffel bag and a promise to return. Life and loss had changed the man who came back. He had not planned to buy land that day. The roadside real estate office was small, its sign faded. Inside, an elderly agent named Martin Graves sat behind a desk piled with yellowed files. Martin was wiry, with silver hair combed straight back, and the quiet look of a man who had spent decades watching people take land and leave it again. He slid a single folder toward Caleb. "Rohr," he said, his voice like old leather, "you might want to look at this." Caleb frowned at the title on the file, 82 acres, Carter Ranch. Inside, the price was typed in bold, $10. $10? Caleb asked. "That's not even the tax on a coffee in this town." Martin only shrugged. "Owner wants it gone. No questions asked. You sign, it's yours." The soldier studied the paper a moment longer. Questions hovered in his mind. Why so cheap? Why so sudden? But he found himself signing anyway. Maybe it was the weight of silence in his life that made him want a place where no one else wanted to go. The drive out to the ranch took him past miles of scorched pasture. The earth was brittle under the wind, dotted with stubborn weeds. At the end of an overgrown dirt track, the house came into view. A 3-room wooden structure, leaning slightly to one side. Roof patched with moss, porch sagging on rusted nails. The front door hung askew on its hinges. It looked like the kind of place that had stopped breathing years ago. Caleb killed the engine and stepped out. His boots sank into the soft earth. The air was cold enough to bite, but it carried the faint smell of ash, fresh, not the stale kind of a long-dead fire. He moved up the creaking steps and pressed a palm to the door. The wood was warped, but warm from the afternoon sun. Inside, the light was thin and dusty. A glass of water sat on the table, a few drops still clinging to its rim. In the corner, the stone fireplace held a mound of ash that radiated faint heat. Someone had been here not long ago. Caleb's instincts sharpened. He scanned the room, his hand unconsciously brushing the pocketknife clipped to his belt. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he crossed into the kitchen. The back door stood slightly open, swaying with the wind. Beyond it lay a narrow porch, looking out over the untamed backyard. That was when he saw it. A small bobcat crouched on the top step, its fur a mottled blend of silver gray and tawny gold. The animal's body was tense, but not trembling, muscles coiled like a spring. Golden brown eyes fixed on him with unblinking focus, half warning, half question. In its jaws, it held not prey, but a frayed scrap of wool, its edges torn and dirty, as though it had been carried for a long time. Caleb froze, reading the scene like a battlefield. The bobcat didn't growl. It didn't back away. Instead, it lowered the scrap to its paws and simply stared. The soldier took a slow breath, crouched down just enough to meet its gaze without towering over it. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of the wind and the quiet crackle of a dying ember inside. He noticed then that the animal's coat was in good condition despite the cold. Someone had cared for it once. Its right ear bore a faint notch, likely from an old scrape. Caleb eased a step closer, his voice low and steady. "What's your story, huh?" The bobcat's ears flicked forward at the sound. It remained still, but its eyes didn't leave his. Caleb spotted something glinting at its neck, a small, tarnished tag. He didn't dare reach for it yet. From behind him, a voice called softly, startling him enough to shift his weight. An elderly woman stood at the side of the porch, hands tucked into a thick knitted shawl. Her face was sun-worn, framed by loose strands of white hair. "You've met Sierra," she said. "She's been here longer than the weeds." Caleb straightened. "You the neighbor?" She nodded. "Evelyn Brooks, lived on the next plot over for 30 years. I used to bring scraps when I could." Her eyes flickered toward the road. Not everyone wanted her here. The bobcat glanced briefly at Evelyn before looking back at Caleb, as if weighing both of them. "What happened to the last owner?" Caleb asked. Evelyn sighed, the sound brittle in the chill air. "Young woman named Marissa Keene, got sick. Bad sick. She kept the bobcat since it was just a kid, raised it here. When she passed, a woman named Verena Cole stepped in. Said she'd take care of Sierra. But one day, Verena was just gone. Left her here. No feed, no shelter except what's left of this house." Caleb looked again at the animal. The wind tugged at its fur, but it stayed put, a sentinel on the step. There was something in its gaze he couldn't shake, an unspoken plea, the same one he had seen in the eyes of stray children in war zones. "I'll keep her," Caleb said quietly. Evelyn's brows lifted. "You don't even know what she's been through." "I know enough," he replied, his voice firm. He set his pack down, pulled out a canteen, and poured a small puddle of water into a shallow dent in the porch's wood. Sierra approached, head low, and began to lap at it. When she finished, she didn't run. She simply sat, tail curling around her paws, and kept watching him. The last light of the day spilled across the fields as Caleb leaned against the porch rail, the cold seeping through his jacket. The mountains beyond Durango stood in shadow, the air thick with the smell of coming snow. Somewhere between the moment he stepped onto that porch and the bobcat lowering its head to drink, something had shifted. The ranch wasn't just a place to disappear anymore. It had become a place where someone, or something, was waiting. The next morning, the frost lay thick across the Durango fields, turning each blade of grass into a tiny spear of glass. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a steaming mug of black coffee, the scent of bitter roast cutting through the cold. Sierra was already there, curled into a tight ball on the top step, her breath puffing faint clouds in the crisp air. When his boots creaked on the boards, her eyes flicked open, sharp and gold. She didn't run. Caleb set his coffee on the rail, crouched, and placed a small plate on the porch, thin strips of dried venison he had kept in his pack since the road trip home. The meat scent drifted in the cold. Sierra's ears tilted forward. She didn't move at first, only studied him with that silent calculation wild things have. Caleb leaned back against the railing, keeping his hands visible. Finally, she stepped forward, muscles rippling under her coat. Around her neck, he saw the dull glint of a small silver tag, its surface worn smooth in some places, but still legible, Sierra. The name seemed to suit her, solid, untamed, as much a part of the mountains as the snow and the pines. Caleb spoke it aloud once, low and steady. The bobcat paused mid-step, her head tilting slightly, as if she recognized the sound. When she finished eating, Sierra retreated to the corner of the porch, curling back into herself, but never taking her eyes off him. Caleb gathered his mug and went inside. The air in the kitchen was stale, touched with the faint scent of smoke and damp wood. Morning light revealed more than he had noticed the day before: dusty shelves lined with mason jars, a cracked porcelain sink, and near the far wall, a small space that had been cleared deliberately. A thin blanket lay folded there, frayed at the edges, with a couple of old books stacked beside it. Caleb picked one up. The cover was faded, but the title read, "World of the San Juan Range." Inside the front cover, written in looping penmanship, was a name, Marissa Keene. He set the book down and reached for a bundle of papers tied with rough twine. The first page was a rescue intake form from the Colorado Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. It detailed Sierra's early life: a bobcat kit found alone in the high country, dehydrated and underweight. Rescuer, Marissa Keene. Age at intake, 4 weeks. Intended release, pending, based on health and behavior. The stack contained more notes: feeding schedules, vet visits, behavior logs. Caleb skimmed them, each detail building a picture of a young woman determined to keep the bobcat alive. But there was nothing after the 3rd year. No transfer forms, no release documentation. It was as if the official record had stopped, leaving only Sierra and an empty house. A knock on the front door broke his thoughts. When Caleb opened it, Evelyn Brooks stood there, holding a basket covered with a tea towel. She was wrapped in a long brown coat, her silver hair braided down her back. Her face was weathered, but her eyes were clear and direct. "Thought you could use breakfast," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She set the basket on the table, revealing warm cornbread, a jar of blackberry jam, and a small thermos. Caleb poured her coffee while she looked around the kitchen. "Hasn't changed much," she murmured. Marissa kept it tidy, even when she was sick. He sat across from her. "You knew her well." Evelyn's gaze softened. "Well enough to know she had more heart than most folks twice her age. She took Sierra in when everyone else said to let nature take its course. Wouldn't hear of putting her down." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Then the sickness came on fast. She kept to herself, didn't tell many people how bad it was." Caleb asked, "And Verena Cole?" At the name, Evelyn's lips thinned. Tall woman, sharp eyes, dressed like she came out of a city office. "She showed up one day, saying she was a family friend here to help." Marissa was too weak to argue. Verena started making decisions, locking doors, keeping people out. "I tried to visit, but she'd meet me on the porch and tell me to leave food at the gate." Caleb leaned back, frowning. "And when Marissa passed? She was just gone. I came by a week later and found the place empty, except for Sierra. No feed, no sign anyone had been here." Evelyn's voice dropped. "I left food when I could, but I've seen the way Verena looks at people who cross her. She's not someone you want for an enemy." Caleb's mind worked quietly. His time in uniform had taught him to listen for what wasn't said. Evelyn's story painted Verena as someone who wanted control, but why over an old house and a wild animal? He glanced toward the porch, where Sierra's silhouette shifted against the light. Evelyn stood to leave, but before she did, she placed a folded scrap of paper on the table. "Old phone number for Marissa's cousin. Don't know if it still works, but he might know more than I do." After she left, Caleb dialed the number from his cell. It rang until a man's voice, rough with sleep, answered. Miles Keene, he introduced himself, Marissa's older cousin, a truck driver based out of Santa Fe. Caleb explained who he was and how he'd found Sierra. There was a long pause before Miles spoke. "Marissa mentioned you once, said you were the guy from Durango who left for the army." He hesitated. "Listen, I didn't even know she was that sick until it was too late. By the time I drove up, the funeral was over. Verena told me everything was handled. I didn't trust her." "Then don't trust her now," Caleb said. They talked for another 10 minutes, Caleb steering the conversation toward any documents or belongings Marissa might have left. Miles said he'd check his storage unit and call back. Before hanging up, he added, "Take care of Sierra." Marissa loved that cat more than anything. That evening, the weather turned. Clouds rolled down from the mountains, and the wind began to hum through the gaps in the old siding. Caleb worked by the dim light of a single lamp, clearing debris from the living room and patching a draft near the window. Sierra ventured inside, padding silently across the floorboards. She sniffed at the corners, inspected the wood stove, then settled on the blanket in the kitchen. Caleb sat nearby, repairing a loose buckle on his pack. He caught himself speaking without thinking. "Looks like you've had this place to yourself too long." Sierra blinked slowly at him, cat's half approval. Later, as the wind rattled the shutters, Caleb placed another small meal beside her blanket. This time, when she finished, she didn't retreat. She stayed where she was, her eyes half closed, as if testing the idea of peace. Outside, Durango's streetlights glowed dim through the mist, and the ranch stood like a solitary island in the night. Caleb knew this was no simple case of an abandoned property. There were holes in the story, holes that someone like Verena would rather keep covered. Somewhere in the quiet between Sierra's slow breathing and the hiss of the wind, Caleb decided he would find out exactly why. By mid-morning, a pale winter sun pushed through the clouds, its weak light spilling into the bedroom of the old ranch house. The air still carried the faint chill of the night before, and Caleb worked with his jacket on, rolling up dusty rugs and sweeping out years of grit from the floorboards. Sierra lay on the threshold, her tail twitching, watching him with quiet curiosity, as though measuring his claim to the space. As he dragged a cedar chest toward the far wall, the sound of wood scraping against wood rang oddly hollow. Caleb paused. He knelt and rapped the boards with his knuckles. Most sounded solid, but one gave a muted echo. Pulling his multi-tool from his pocket, he worked the tip between two planks and pried one up. A shallow compartment lay hidden beneath, its edges lined with dry, splintered pine. Inside sat a small leather-bound journal, its brown cover worn soft at the corners, and beneath it a folded stack of papers bound with faded blue ribbon. The smell of lavender and dust was an echo of a woman's hand. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the journal. The handwriting inside was elegant, but uneven in places, as if penned by someone growing weaker with each entry. The earliest pages spoke of life on the ranch, the changing seasons, Sierra's first attempts at hunting, small triumphs like repairing a fence before the first snow. But as the pages turned, a tone of unease began to creep in. The name Verena appeared more often, paired with words like pressure, papers, and trust broken. One entry stopped Caleb cold. "She says, if I don't sign, Sierra will be taken somewhere I'll never find her." He set the journal down and reached for the ribbon-bound papers. The top sheet was a will, handwritten but unsigned. It left the entire property, all assets, and the care of Sierra to "my lawful guardian, if that guardian should return," Caleb Rohr, written in deliberate strokes, or, failing that, to the Colorado Wildlife Protection Trust. The legal phrasing was imperfect, but the intent was unmistakable. Caleb's jaw tightened. This was more than a keepsake. It was leverage, the kind that could expose whatever Verena had done to push the official paperwork through. The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew his attention. From the bedroom window, he saw a tan pickup pull up outside. A tall man stepped out, wearing a canvas work jacket and a baseball cap stained from years of sweat and sun. He carried himself with an easy gait, the kind of loose confidence of someone who worked outdoors every day. Caleb met him at the porch. The man tipped his cap. "Name's Tyler Mendez. I work for the county assessor's office. Heard there's a new owner out here." His voice was even, but his eyes scanned the property with the instinct of someone cataloging details. Caleb introduced himself and invited him in. Over coffee, Tyler explained he'd been sent to confirm the property's transfer and check for any structures not listed on record. "Thing is," Tyler said, "this place has a history. Couple years back, paperwork changed hands faster than usual. No inspection, no tax review. Never sat right with me. When Caleb asked about Verena, Tyler's lips pressed into a thin line. Saw her in the assessor's office once. Slick talker, always on a phone. She knew how to get people to move paper without asking too many questions. If she's involved, I'd keep your eyes open. Caleb debated whether to mention the journal and the will, but decided against it for now. Trust was earned slowly in his world. Instead, he steered the conversation to the property's original records. Tyler promised to dig through the county archives and left with a firm handshake. That afternoon, Caleb wrapped the journal and will in a clean cloth, slid them into his pack, and drove into town. The law office of Marcus Lane sat in an old brick building on Main Street, its front windows lined with dusty legal tomes. Marcus was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples. Years as a JAG officer in the military had given him a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, but his eyes softened when he saw Caleb. "Roar," Marcus said, rising from behind his desk. "Didn't think I'd see you back here." Caleb laid the bundle on the desk and unwrapped it. He spoke little, letting Marcus turn the pages himself. Marcus read in silence for several minutes, his expression shifting from curiosity to concentration to something harder. "This," Marcus said at last, tapping the unsigned will, "isn't just a family keepsake. It's the decedent's clear intent. If the official will contradicts this, and we can prove the contradiction was forced or fraudulent, we can get a judge to reopen the estate case. And if you're named as the intended guardian, you've got standing to claim both the property and the Bobcat." He flipped to the journal entries. "And these notes, Verena's threats, may not be admissible as hard evidence without corroboration, but they support a pattern of coercion. We'll need more, witness statements, records from the Wildlife Trust, maybe even a handwriting expert to verify this is Marissa's writing." Caleb leaned back. "Tyler Mendez from the assessor's office thinks the property transfer was rushed. He's looking into the archives." "Good," Marcus said. "If he finds irregularities, that's another piece in the puzzle." "But, Roar," he met Caleb's gaze, "if Verena went to this much trouble, she won't just let it go. You ready for that fight?" Caleb thought of Sierra on the porch, the way she had watched him with that unblinking, waiting stare. "I'm ready." Before leaving, Marcus handed him a small voice recorder. "Carry this. If she shows up, get her talking. Even small admissions can be useful." Back at the ranch, the wind had picked up, rattling the tin roof. Caleb found Sierra inside, curled on the blanket in the kitchen. He crouched down, resting a hand on the floor near her. "Looks like we've got work to do," he said quietly. She blinked at him, slow and deliberate, as if she understood more than he could guess. The morning of the hearing broke cold and bright over La Plata County, the snow and the mountain passes glowing under a pale winter sun. Caleb parked his truck 2 blocks from the courthouse, preferring the walk to clear his head. He wore his only suit, its shoulders still broad from his military days, but with a faint crease from years in storage. In his inner jacket pocket lay the voice recorder Marcus had given him, though he doubted Verena would say much in the presence of a judge. The courthouse itself was a sandstone building with high windows and steps worn smooth from decades of foot traffic. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. People's voices echoed in the tall hallway, each sound bouncing from the marble columns. Caleb found Marcus Lane waiting outside courtroom 3, flipping through a neat binder of exhibits. The lawyer's dark hair was combed back, his tie precise. "We're up first," Marcus said without looking up. "She'll try to rattle you. Don't give her the satisfaction." Verena Cole was already inside when they entered. She sat at the defense table with her attorney, a lean man in his 50s named William Hanford. Hanford had sharp cheekbones and a voice like dry paper, the kind that sounded polite even when it was cutting. Verena herself looked as if she had stepped out of a glossy magazine, charcoal skirt suit, gold watch, hair drawn into a flawless chignon, but her eyes, a cold slate gray, fixed on Caleb with the kind of calculation he had seen in hostile negotiations overseas. The judge, Honorable Miriam Alder, was a woman in her early 60s, with clear hazel eyes and a reputation for a low tolerance for theatrics. She rapped her gavel once, bringing the room to order. "We are here to address the petition regarding the estate of Marissa Keene and the guardianship of the bobcat known as Sierra," she began. Marcus rose first, presenting the rescue records that listed Caleb Rohr as a designated future guardian should Marissa become unable to care for Sierra. He followed with the leather-bound journal and the unsigned will, carefully sliding them into evidence. "These documents," Marcus said, his voice firm but measured, "are in my client's possession because they were hidden by the decedent to keep them safe. They show her clear intent that Mr. Rohr inherit the property and continue to care for Sierra. The official will submitted by Ms. Cole contradicts this intent, and as we will demonstrate, contains a signature obtained when Marissa was gravely ill and under duress." He handed up the handwriting analyst's report, which detailed inconsistencies in the official will, hesitation marks, uneven pressure, and letters formed unlike Marissa's earlier writing samples. Judge Alder studied the report without comment. Hanford countered with a slow, deliberate stride to the lectern. "Your Honor, this is a wild animal, not a child. My client stepped in when no one else would. She provided for the property and for Sierra for as long as was reasonable." His tone was smooth, but when he glanced at Marcus, there was a flicker of something sharper. Marcus called Evelyn Brooks to the stand. The elderly woman, bundled in a wool coat and scarf, took her oath with steady hands. She testified to seeing Sierra alone on the property for months after Marissa's death, to being turned away by Verena, and to the times she left food at the gate out of fear the animal would starve. That bobcat, Evelyn said, was all Marissa had left. Leaving her like that was cruel. When it was Caleb's turn, Marcus kept the question simple. "Tell the court how you found Sierra," he said. Caleb described the drive up the dirt path, the sagging porch, the cold air smelling faintly of ash. He told of seeing Sierra on the back step, the scrap of wool in her mouth, the eyes that locked onto his without fear. "She didn't run," he said. "She just looked at me like she'd been waiting for someone. I've seen that look before, in places most of you will never go, places where the only thing someone has left is the hope that somebody will finally come." The courtroom was silent for a moment after he finished. Even Judge Alder's expression softened briefly before she looked down to her notes. Hanford tried to shake Caleb's account, suggesting that Sierra's survival proved she could fend for herself, that keeping a wild bobcat in human care was neither safe nor lawful. But Marcus countered with the rehabilitation records, noting Sierra's dependency due to early human rearing. The afternoon session brought a surprise. Tyler Mendez had been subpoenaed as a witness after Marcus received his findings the day before. Tyler walked in, wearing his work jacket over a collared shirt, his hat respectfully removed. He testified to the unusual speed of the property transfer to Verena, the absence of required inspections, and the missing tax review. "I've seen quick transfers before," Tyler said, "but never one that skipped this many steps without someone pulling strings." Verena's jaw tightened during his testimony, though she kept her gaze fixed on the table. When closing arguments came, Marcus spoke plainly. "This is about more than land. It's about honoring the clear wishes of someone who knew her time was short, who trusted that her friend would protect what mattered. Instead, her property was seized through questionable paperwork, and the animal she loved was abandoned. The evidence is here. The choice is clear." Hanford leaned into the podium. "Your Honor, we can't let sentiment cloud the fact that my client acted in good faith. No crime has been proven, and no law requires this court to hand over valuable property to someone who's been absent for years." Judge Alder sat back, her hands folded, eyes moving between the two sides. "I will take this under advisement," she said at last. "We will reconvene in 3 days for my ruling." She rapped the gavel once. Outside, the air was sharper, the sun dipping low behind the mountains. Caleb and Marcus walked down the courthouse steps in silence until Marcus said, "She's rattled." "That's good. But she's not done." Caleb glanced toward the west, where snow clouds gathered. Neither am I. The ruling came down on a crisp, clear morning. Caleb sat at the petitioner's table as Judge Alder's voice filled the courtroom. The will submitted by Ms. Cole is hereby voided, she declared. Ownership of the Carter Ranch and guardianship of the Bobcat known as Sierra are granted to Mr. Caleb Rohr. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of years of absence, of things left unsaid, of a bond that had formed in silence on a cold porch. Outside, the air smelled of snowmelt and woods. Marcus clapped Caleb on the shoulder, his usual stoic face breaking into a brief grin. "You did it," he said. Caleb's gaze drifted past the courthouse steps to where Sierra waited in the truck bed, sitting in a makeshift crate lined with blankets. She blinked slowly at him as he approached, tail flicking once in acknowledgement. The drive back to Durango wound through valleys where the aspens were bare, their white trunks catching the afternoon light, bones of the land. When they reached the ranch, Caleb opened the gate and let the truck roll in. The property felt different now, less like a contested ground, more like something alive again. That first week, he worked from dawn until the last light faded. The roof came first. Caleb replaced rotting boards and hammered down new shingles until the rain could no longer creep in. Sierra prowled the yard while he worked, leaping onto fence posts to watch him. Her movements were quieter now, less the darting flinch of an animal expecting harm. Next came the fences. Caleb dug post holes along the property line, the frost crunching under his boots. One afternoon, Evelyn Brooks arrived with a thermos of stew and a fresh loaf of bread. "You're making the place look like it belongs to someone again," she said, watching Sierra weave between the posts. Evelyn's visits became a quiet ritual, never intrusive, always carrying some small offering from her kitchen. In the yard beyond the barn, Caleb found the remains of an old apple orchard. Gnarled trees stood half dead, their branches bare but still reaching. He pruned what he could save, cutting away the rot and letting the winter air seal the wounds. "Your mom planted these," Evelyn said one day, her voice low as she passed him a pair of pruning shears. She said apple trees meant there would always be something sweet after the hard seasons. Sierra's trust grew in small increments. At first, she would only take food from the bowl he set down and retreat a few feet to eat. But one cold morning, as he worked in the barn, he felt the brush of fur against his leg. She had approached on her own, pressing briefly into his side before moving past him to inspect a stack of hay bales. Caleb didn't push it. He'd learned that trust was something to be earned without demand. By late October, the days had sharpened into frost-laced mornings. Caleb woke to a thin crust of ice on the water trough and the sound of Sierra padding along the porch. That day, he loaded the truck with two things, a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the far pasture and a young red maple tree in a burlap sack. The cemetery lay just outside town, quiet except for the whisper of wind through the dry grass. Marissa Keene's grave sat beneath a weathered oak, the headstone simple and unadorned. Caleb knelt and placed the bouquet at its base. Sierra sat a few paces away, her ears turning toward every sound, but she didn't leave. "I came back," he said softly, his voice carrying only to the stone. "And I'll keep her safe. I promise." He dug a hole beside the grave and planted the maple, packing the earth firmly around it. The sapling's leaves, still clinging to a deep crimson, shivered in the breeze. He imagined the tree years from now, its canopy casting shade over the resting place, its roots holding the soil firm. Back at the ranch, the sun was sliding behind the mountains, staining the sky in bands of gold and violet. Caleb lit a fire in the old stone hearth. Sierra stretched out on the rug in front of it, her body a warm arc of fur and muscle. She closed her eyes, the faint rise and fall of her breath blending with the soft crackle of the flames. Caleb stood for a moment, hands resting on the back of a chair, listening to the wind outside. It no longer sounded like something trying to get in. It was just the voice of the mountains, steady and familiar. The fight was over. What lay ahead was work of a different kind, the kind that built something lasting. He took off his coat and hung it by the door, the scent of pine and smoke clinging to the fabric. Sierra stirred slightly at the sound, then settled again, her tail curling tighter around her. Caleb sat down in the chair nearest the fire, the heat loosening the stiffness in his shoulders. Through the window, the maple leaves caught the last flicker of daylight before the night took hold. Caleb allowed himself a rare moment of stillness, knowing that both he and Sierra had earned it. Caleb's journey with Sierra is proof that patience, consistency, and love can turn fear into peace and an abandoned place into a true home. In daily life, we all have our own Sierra, someone or something that depends on us, even if they can't say it out loud. It might be a child, a friend, a pet, or even a dream we've been too afraid to nurture. The choice is ours: walk away or stand firm and protect it until it thrives. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment with your own story of trust, resilience, or second chances. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us of the strength in loyalty and kindness, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one.